All right, so as I was just saying, what we're going to discuss this morning, there's been a lot of questions, and I think there's some misunderstandings with the relation about what does it mean to have an appraisal contingency? How can you shorten one? When do you have to have an appraisal all the time, or when can an appraisal be waived? Just this last weekend, I had a lot of questions, people calling, asking it. So I thought, let's spend a few minutes and let's try to give you some information on appraisals and how they work and when you need to have, when an appraisal contingency is going to be important, when one is not going to be important. What does it mean to have an appraisal gap? When do you need one? When don't you need one? And so I'm going to go through that, and as just you ask questions as we go forward and see what happens. So to start with, I want to make it as simple as I can by using a loan amount, just using a purchase price of $500,000, just because the math is easy. All right. So we have a $500,000 purchase. Now, the question comes up, do I have to have an appraisal contingency? And don't misinterpret an appraisal contingency with the lender needing an appraisal. The lender is going to need something, whether it's the lender is going to either need an appraisal or the lender is going to need an appraisal waiver from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The lender, again, you've heard me say this before, lender does not just say, we don't need an appraisal. Can't happen. We're either going to get an appraisal or we're going to get a waiver, but that waiver comes from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We don't dictate it, they do. So I have a purchase price of $500,000, and the borrower is going to put down 5%. All right, that means they're going to get a loan for $475,000, assuming that's their contract sales price. This is what they're writing. I'm going to do 5% down. I'm going to get a loan for $475,000. And they're tight on money. They don't have a lot of money. So now the appraisal comes in at $490,000. What does that mean to the borrower in this instance? Somebody tell me? Trevon.
Their loan amount reduces.
Loan amount reduces, so we're going to go from $490. So the loan amount is now going to be $465,500. That's what the lender's going to loan them. This is 95% of the appraised value, because the lender always uses the lesser of the appraised value or the contract sales price. That's the way every lender does it. So what else does it mean in this case?
Down payment is reduced.
So now their down payment in this example is easier if I do it this way. 490 minus 465,500. So the 5% down is $24,500 plus the difference, $10,000. That's $34,500. Now, for somebody who's tight on cash, this number looks a lot different than $25,000. Wouldn't you agree? So in a case like this, how important is it to have an appraisal contingency? Very important, because if there is no appraisal contingency, and if this came in at 480 instead of 490, I mean, now all of a sudden they've got to have another $10,000. So whenever you have somebody that's putting in a smaller down payment, 5% or 10%, and they do not have a lot of extra money to cover what you and I might call an appraisal gap. They just don't have a lot of extra money. An appraisal contingency is absolutely critical so that you can ensure they're going to get the $34,500. Now let's take a similar situation, but not exactly the same. Let's change this here.
That only happens if the buyer and seller agree to reduce the selling price to the appraised price.
Correct, if they agree. And in this market, we're not seeing a whole bunch of that. Now let's take the situation where I have a $500,000 purchase price and the buyer says, I'm putting 50% down. That's going to give them a loan amount of $250,000. Does this buyer need an appraisal contingency? No, why not?
If it comes in low, they can just wiggle a little bit on down payment amount and still have plenty of cash.
Let's say the appraisal comes in at $450,000. Well, they're still going to put their $250,000 down. So now, as far as the lender is concerned, $250,000 loan on a $450,000 appraised value, that's 55.6% loan to value. The lender doesn't care. So in this example, even though the lender's still going to get an appraisal, unless they get an appraisal waiver, the lender doesn't care. The buyer does not have to get an appraisal, they don't have to put in an appraisal contingency. When would the buyer put in an appraisal contingency? When would they put one in this instance?
If they don't want to pay more than the appraised value?
Say that louder, that's perfect.
If they don't want to pay more than the appraised value?
If the buyer does not, even though the contract's $500,000, the buyer says, I'm going to put 50% down, but I'm not paying more than what the appraised value is, then they have to have an appraisal contingency. So whether or not we have an appraisal contingency is typically two different things. Number one, we've got to make sure that they're going to have enough money so that they can, in fact, execute this purchase and not lose their earnest money. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two, they're going to put 50% down, but they're unwilling to pay more than what the home appraises for. Have you had this situation occur where they don't want to pay more than what the appraisal comes in at and they're putting 40, 50, 60% down? Have you had that happen? No. We're not seeing much of that, because if they're putting that much down, they're saying the house is worth $500,000, I'm just going to pay for it. I'm not going to worry about it. That's what's going on. So, appraisal contingencies are critically important in this scenario. Now, let's talk about the appraisal gap. So, how are you going about determining, let's assume the buyer says, I'm willing to do some type of an appraisal gap. How are you determining what that gap should be?
We're figuring out roughly what their closing cost is, and then how much money over that are you willing?
Okay, so you're determining how much they're going to have at closing,
Yeah.
how much they have remaining,
Yeah.
how much that's going to be adjusted. Any other factors that come into play?
I mean, one that's hurt me with a buyer right now is we're having to offer 50, 60K above asking to be competitive, but we're only able to offer 10K in appraisal gap coverage because that's how much cash they have. And while that's all we can do to listing agents, that's really weak. So I mean, you might as well be offering nothing. It seems like if you're not offering about as much as you're going to go over list.
Right. Okay. So in other words, using $500,000, if that's my list price, and I'm saying, hey, I can't go above 510 because that's all the extra money I've got is the 10,000, but I'm willing to offer you 530. And the seller, if I'm hearing you right, Lanier is saying, the seller says, wait a minute, if you can't give me that 30,000, then don't even bother because it's not going to make any difference. And that's not exactly true, because there is one other factor. And that is, what do you think that home will appraise for? Because, there's a strategy out there right now. And I know some listing agents are doing this. They're putting homes on the market for a few $1,000s below what they think it's going to appraise for. So if they think it's going to appraise for $500, there are some listing agents out there, some in this office, that'll actually set the list price at $495, $450. Why? Not $450, $495, $490, a little bit below, to create what? A demand. Because somebody says, wait a minute once, what's wrong? It's a $500,000. You're the buyer's agent. You're looking at this saying, I know that home will sell for $500, but they've got it on the market for $495 or $490. You and every other real estate agent that's got a buyer in that price range is going to do what? You're going to go look at the home. And if the home is a nice house, what happens? It's good. It's not going to sell for $500. It's going to sell for linear $525 or $530, maybe even $540.
That could also create a problem on the seller side, because what about if it's an instance where the seller sees that people are offering above what we think or they think it's going to appraise, but now they see what people are offering. So let me put a number. You list the property for $490. And it will appraise at $500, but you have offers at like $580. If you don't necessarily have appraisal gap. Now the seller is like, well, I'm not selling less than $580. I don't care what happens. So how does that scenario work? How can you, as a listing agent, even know for sure what this, if it's really gonna appraise for $500? How can you, I guess, not guarantee, but how can you make sure the buyers is going to honor
The appraisal gap.
Yes.
What I'm seeing is that they are actually, just like a cash offer where you've got to show proof of funds, listing agents are saying, you have to show me proof of funds for the appraisal gap. And it's very common today, if I do not initiate a phone call to the listing agent, which I typically do now, the listing agent's calling me and asking me, do they have enough money to cover the appraisal gap? And I can't tell them how much they have or don't have, but I can answer yes or no. And that's what we have to do today. That's how you cover that. Because as a listing agent, my responsibility is to protect my seller. And if somebody says, I'm going to give you, I'm going to offer $580,000 on a home that's listed for $500, and I'll cover the $80,000, okay, fine. Then somebody's got to make sure they've got enough money to do that. I haven't seen one quite that dramatic, but maybe you have. Trevon, you're nodding your head. You've had.
I had one like that, and they offered $60K over, but they had $120K in the bank. So.
Okay, but they had 120 in the bank, so they were able to do it. Okay.
But to her point, though, if your seller is like that, they're more than likely greedy.
But then I guess their thing is, why would the buyers offer $560 when you know you're not going to pay $560? Because if the property is listed at $490 and you offer $560, is the seller really greedy to ask you to pay for that? Why would you offer that if you didn't?
Because they want the house.
Yeah, on
They
the
want the
buyer
house.
side, it's, hey, let's see if this listing agent will fall for it. I mean,
Hey.
I'm gonna lean on an appraisal coming in at 510, and then I'm only gonna pay you 515 or 520, not 560. I mean, it's good tactics on the buyer side.
Yeah.
But a good listing agent will shut you down.
Here's the situation. This is what's happening. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. Here's what's happening. This office, an agent in this office back in November, wrote a contract for someone, or December, wrote a contract for a client, for a buyer, for $980,000. The home was listed at $890,000. They wrote a contract $100,000 over the list price. Now, mind you, they were putting $600,000 as a down payment off of the $980,000. So they're getting a $380,000 loan. There was no appraisal contingency. They frankly didn't care. We ended up having to get an appraisal, which I found really odd, but we did have to get an appraisal. And the appraisal came in just over 900, which means these people were buying, they paid 980. The appraisal came in just over 900 on a list price of 890. They didn't care. Why? They wanted the house. And they had the money, so they did. Does that make sense? All right, questions that you're coming up with, because this last weekend, I had a lot of questions about appraisal contingencies. You know, when do I need it, when don't I? Trevon?
I don't exactly remember the scenario, but Jay talked about one where if you can waive either the appraisal contingency or something like that, but then you put in the stip, you put a special stip in there that kind of brings it back around. You know what I'm talking about?
So it's the appraisal gap clause that Weissman came up with, where basically it says that I, the buyer, am going to cover an appraisal gap of up to $10,000 from the contract price. So under, if it goes, and then if it goes below 10,000, I have the right to walk away from the deal and get my earnest money back. And that is like a trick that you can play on listing agents sometimes if they don't read the language very well.
Yeah.
But what a good listing agent would do is counter back with the other stip that says that I'm gonna cover $10,000 above what the appraisal amount is, and it also does not have the language.
The language that I can.
Says that I get to walk if it doesn't appraise right.
Right. Good, that's a great question. Ami, you had a question.
I was gonna say, because I'm still kind of like, so thinking about the buyer's perspective, when you, I guess, encourage the buyer or let them offer, let's say, 580 on the property that maybe appraised at 540 or something, and you know they don't have the money to cover the gap, but they betting on that gamble, am I, as a buyer's agent, am I really acting in the best interest of my buyer? Because what about if the seller say, no, I'm not changing it?
Are you saying without an appraisal contingency? Like making that offer and waiving the appraisal contingency?
Yes.
Oh, that would not be,
Yeah.
that you're not protecting your buyer in that case. That is, there's no one in this office that would, none of the management in this office would let you do that because you're not protecting your buyer in that case. They don't have the money for the gap. They've agreed that they're going to pay over that and no contingency, and they don't have the money for it. That's not taking care of the buyer. Can't do that. I mean, you could do it, but you wouldn't do it.
Even with a contingency, so you have a contingency saying that, you know, it has to, you can walk away, but you, the agent, know they don't have the money, it may not appraise. They can walk away, but aren't they losing money?
Yeah,
'Cause
Well, they're going to lose their appraisal
Is it,
fee.
I guess, wise to advise my client to do that, or do you think it's better to discourage that this property might not be for you?
That's
No.
a qualifying broker question.
What's that?
That's a qualifying broker question.
Yeah, you know, here's the thing. I really think, I know what you're saying, Ami. They don't have the money to go for the extra 40,000, but they have an appraisal contingency which says that if it doesn't appraise, that they can then walk away. As long as they can walk away and there's no appraisal gap written in there. If they say that I will pay this price up to a certain amount of money, then that's a whole different situation. But if all they're saying, I'm going to put my offer in at 580, no appraisal gap, I've got my appraisal contingency, and if it doesn't come in at 580, there's nothing wrong with that. Perfectly okay.
All they'd be out is what the appraisal fee, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
It's like $1,000.
I mean, it's not nothing, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
'cause I see, I'm saying that because I see people do that.
Well, okay, here's the thing. If you're able to do that, then the listing agent isn't doing their job.
Yeah.
Because there's no good listing agent that's going to let that happen. It just isn't.
I have this scenario where the seller is like, well, I don't care. We have, because the seller is like, okay, require them to get their appraisal done right away, because me, as a seller, it's going to help me, because I'm gonna know what
Sure.
the appraisal is, but tell them, I'm not selling them under what we agreed
Right.
on.
That's fine.
So, to me, I don't know, I feel like it's a lose-lose for the buyer, but.
Well, that's fine. I mean, it's just the buyer is going to end up losing their cost of their appraisal, as Amy indicated. So that's just going to happen. Now, one other thing. How quickly can you get appraisals in? All right. Assuming you do not get an appraisal waiver. All right. Now, this morning I got a call from an agent in this office, and they need the contract's not binding yet. It's supposed to go binding today. And they need to have the appraisal in by Friday. And so the question came, Greg, number one, can you do it? Number two, how much will it cost? So the answer was, yes, we can do it. And the cost in this particular case is going to be an additional $300 on top of the $475. So it's going to cost $775 to get it in. Now, I know the strategy. When I look at the exhibit, the financing exhibit, it's going to say 0 financing days and 0 appraisal days. Why does that agent want that in by Friday? They're getting it inside of due diligence, exactly. So when the offer is made, the offer is made with 0 financing, 0 appraisal.
Well, that's brilliant.
But then the financing part, though, how do you know that for sure?
Because I know I can do the loan, it's a piece of
Okay,
cake.
so it's if you have to trust the lender.
Yeah, you got to trust you absolutely have to trust the lender. Yes, 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 yes.
I love that.
You absolutely have to trust the lender. So in that case, all that they're doing is they're going to make sure they get that appraisal in by Friday, inside the due diligence period. And as long as it comes in, everybody's happy. If it doesn't, then they're going to walk. Well, they may not walk, depends what the difference is. But so now, normal appraisals right now, and again, institutions a little bit different. In our case, appraisals, normal appraisal times are 10 to 12 days. So from the day I order it, not from the day you go binding, from the day that I order it. Because the process is you go binding on Sunday. You send me the contract. Monday morning, we have to go and start preparing what's called regulatory disclosures. We send out the disclosures, and later that day, the borrower hopefully e-signs all of the disclosures. One of the documents in that disclosure package is called an intent to proceed. Once they sign that, we can order the appraisal. So more than likely, we're going to order the appraisal on Tuesday. You went binding on Sunday. And depending on how many days you put in for the appraisal contingency, if you said, well, Greg, you told me 10 to 12, you put in 10 days, now I have 8. So you be careful that you're giving the lender whatever number of days it is from the day they order it. And it's usually 1 to 2 days after you go binding before the lender can actually order the appraisal. So it's possible I would have been able to order that today, but it might not be till tomorrow. It depends when the borrower signs their documents. So 1 to 2 days. Now, what happens if you put in 10 days and the 10th day is on Sunday? Now what does that do?
You're outside.
The lender only has 8 because Saturday and Sunday don't count. That means if you put 10 days and the Sunday, and it comes in on a Sunday, the 10th day is Sunday, that means the lender has 8 days. That's a problem. Now there is a simple way around that. And several of the agents in this office are using it. They're simply putting a clause in there that says that if any due diligence or contingency dates land on a weekend or a holiday, it rolls to the next business day. Perfect. Now I get all my days. So that's just something to look for inside of inside the contracts. Now, let's assume things are kind of moving normally. When do most people want their appraisal ordered?
After the inspection.
After the inspection. Thank you, Ami. Exactly. Because they don't want to spend the $475 or $500 to get an appraisal if they're not going to buy the house. So they're going to do it then. What is a normal due diligence period?
10 to 14 days.
3 to 5.
What's that?
Right now, 3 to 5.
3 to 5? Whatever it happens to be, okay, 3, 5, 7, whatever it is. But if it's 5 days, and it's going to take 10 to 12 days to get the appraisal in, so my appraisal contingency needs to be what? 15 to 17 days. Exactly. And if it falls on a Saturday or a Sunday, then rolls to the following Monday. So that's where you've got to add that up. And if you have a question on it, if you're using me, call me, I'll walk you through it. It's pretty simple. But it's very important that you give enough days, otherwise all of a sudden now they're dealing with rush situations. Now, normal rush for us, if somebody says, Greg, if I rush it, when can I get it? 7 days usually. I can get that appraisal in 7 days. If I get it in 7 days, my cost on that is going to be somewhere between $150 to about $225. Kind of depends where the property is. And every lender's a little bit different, but pretty close to the same. All right? Any questions? All right, thanks.